Are you familiar with the Great Reset?
So I'm like kind of macro level, like I haven't dug into each of it, but certainly on a macro level.
You just have this World Economic Forum thing about how there's going to be a global reset of capitalism for stakeholder capitalism, and it's very woke. And we start seeing these things happen in the United States with small businesses. A lot of what I think you cover. That's why I ask, because a lot of people have suggested that the moves the government was making, whether intentional or not, greatly benefited this idea of a great reset.
100%.
So you wrote a book about the war on small businesses. Tell me what the government did and what happened to these small businesses throughout the past year.
Yeah, so war on small business. So this is the most underreported, infuriating story of the last 12 to 15 months. And really, if you want to talk about it going back decades, but really in the last 12 to 15 months, you had a government deciding who was essential and who was non-essential, who was going to thrive and who was going to fight to survive. And this was not based on data. This was not based on science. This was based on political clout and connections. And what that did, and we talked a little bit about it, is it enabled the greatest wealth transfer that we've ever seen in history and the greatest power transfer. You had 7 technology companies in 2020 that gained collectively $3.4 trillion in value in 7 companies. At the same time that you had Main Street businesses, by June of 2020, Hamilton Projects said 400,000 of them had closed permanently, millions more struggling to survive. Oh, and by the way, it was a record year for initial public offerings. It was a record year for SPACs, which are special purpose acquisition companies, which are highly speculative investment vehicles that only pop up in very frothy environments where people are trying to chase yield. And, again, there's this just giant disconnect. Spenders or savers and retirees, all getting thrown under the bus. And nobody wants to talk about this. Nobody wants to talk about this battle that's going on and that has been sort of laid out for us over the last couple of decades as we've moved away from capitalism to more towards central planning. And then the worst part about the whole thing is that capitalism is the one that's getting blamed for it, even though it was done by government mandates. And so that's why, as I was approached to kind of do an economic debrief on what was happening during the pandemic, that the small business story just had that line. It was like so important, but it was also just important in terms of creating that through line between decentralization and central planning, because that's what so many of us are fighting for. If it's not small business, it's crypto, it's the gig economy, it's the creator economy. All of these are trying to go in a decentralized manner to fight back and have those free market tenants against this consolidated power. And so it's really important for us to all be aligned on that.
I want to ask you about something that Biden said, and he said it in a really weird way, but okay, we got the story. Pay them more. Bizarre moment. Biden whispers and blames employers' low wages for worker shortages, then insists inflation will only be temporary. So there's 2 things here. This idea that the reason companies are struggling to find people to work for them is that they're not paying well enough. But we also know that the CDC just extended the eviction moratorium, which is, in essence, free money for a lot of people. There's also the extended unemployment benefits, which is literally free money for a lot of people. Not that I'm suggesting these people don't need that money, but it certainly creates an economic pressure where people are less inclined to work or go seek out work. And so Biden is making the accusation that it's the small businesses' fault, or companies in general, for not paying more.
I mean, so basically, this is all part of the plan, and I'll just ask you to keep this in the back of your mind as we talk about this. Like, if you were trying to kill small businesses, if you were trying to only have a handful of big businesses, and you were trying to get people more dependent on the government through UBI, those kinds of things, would you do anything different than what played out the last 12 to 15 months without being just 100% obvious? So, yeah, I mean, you have the government now in competition with the businesses for employees. And I'm all for paying employees as much as possible. I think it's a good business practice. I think that you retain better employees and more loyal. But you don't want to legislate that, because then you've got 16-year-olds who are holding up a sign that says, come see the sandwich shop, who are getting paid $30 an hour, when you could just stick that, in the side of the road. There's an economic reason behind it. So the fact that we have 9.3 million jobs that we can't fill is because central planners didn't want you to be able to fill them. And they wanted people to be conditioned to depend on the government. But we know that the only people who've ever gotten wealthy being on the government dole are politicians. Nobody ever gets wealthy on the government dole.
It feels to me like this is all part of the same exact problem. I'll call it a problem, right? So you had the government shuts down in a variety of fashions, different governments, different jurisdictions, shut down small business. Walmart, Target, big box stores, Amazon, they're all open. So they made, how much, what was the number? Was it 3 trillion?
So it wasn't necessary. There were 7 tech companies. So, Google, Amazon, Tesla, Facebook, whatever it was. $3.4 trillion in value. 2 tiers to that. So like you said, they were open for business. So the small businesses that couldn't be open for businesses saw their customers moving to these big companies and the dollars going that way. And then you had the Federal Reserve pumping in money to support the stock market. So the stock prices increased. So the value of those companies increased as well. So it was done on 2 levels.
Now think about the next circumstance created by the government. Not only are small businesses competing with the government because they're paying people, but all of the money, I should say most of the money last year, went to these big, massive box stores. So who can afford to pay more? When Joe Biden says, pay them more. Okay, well, Amazon's like, we did have, massive profits last year. All right, we'll increase wages that can outcompete the government. But that mom and pop coffee shop, they can't just manifest money out of nowhere. They can't compete.
And there's no surprise that, prior to this, you had seen Amazon and some of the other big companies start pushing for a higher mandated minimum wage. And the reason why they started pushing for a higher mandated minimum wage, because they know it's anti-competitive and they know it would drive some of the smaller players out of business. And so basically that's what's happening on a de facto basis here, is they're trying to end around, instead of legislating it, they're trying to do it by, we're going to interfere in the market. We're going to make it really difficult for people to want to go back to work. We're going to compensate them for staying home. And then we're going to force these businesses who have been struggling. They were shut down by government mandate. They were not appropriately compensated for giving up their property for the public good under eminent domain concepts under the Constitution. Then you just get back. You've hung on this whole time, and you can't find anybody to work. And by the way, it's not even just low wages. I've talked to small businesses all over this country. They're paying higher wages. They're offering bonuses. Many of them can't even get people to apply. So it's not even just like, oh, well, you need to raise the wage a couple dollars, because they've done that and they still can't get people back.
Some have argued that the problem here is fulfillment. With last year, people being given the opportunity not to, say, flip burgers, which I don't think there's any lack of dignity in being a burger flipper. People love burgers, but a lot of people, they want more fulfilling work. And so the argument is they're just choosing to avoid Burger King or McDonald's or even working at a coffee shop.
So yes and no. So I do think there are a lot of people who had the opportunity for once to pause and reflect and actually make some decisions, which I think is, if there's any silver lining, maybe that's one of them. But if that were the case, we wouldn't have 9.3 million jobs unfilled. You would have the ones at the higher levels getting filled, and then these other ones not being filled. And that's not what the data is coming back and telling us. Nobody can find the jobs. And it's not just the burger flipper jobs. It's a lot of mid-tier and other jobs as well. And then the interesting part, if you look at kind of the data around wages, you're going to see, wages really haven't increased. But the hidden sort of data behind that is that a lot of boomers took the opportunity to retire and to opt out of the workforce. So you have people who are making high 5 and 6 figure salaries who said, you know what, I'm going to retire. So those wages have now come out. And when you're computing the average, obviously that brings the average down. So even if you look at the low end, those have gone up enormously. But if you look at it as just one giant pie, it looks like, wages haven't moved at all.
Another component too is these are the jobs we can see when we see Burger King putting up a sign saying $500 sign-on bonus or $1,000.
Right.
What people don't realize is that sourcing raw materials and even manufacturing jobs, a lot of these companies that you don't know even exist are struggling to find people.
And then the inflation piece, as you had
right.
had led in with, so that you have the problem with not being able to find people, which is making it more costly, but then trying to get the raw materials and everything kind of running through the supply chain, and then obviously just having just an enormous amount of money supply out there, all of these things driving up prices. So again, if you're the small business who can't find somebody to work and you've hung on to survive, you also, if you're trying to buy chicken because you make chicken wings, we saw, was it Buffalo Wild Wings is now doing like the thighs because they can't get the wings anymore.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know if it's that particular brand. One of the major brands has changed to thighs because they can't get the wings anymore.
We here at Timcast love some B-dubs.
We do.
We had an argument. Ian was right.
Yeah.
So is this personally devastating news for you then?
I'm gonna flip this whole table over.
Take a lot of work.
And this is how this affects your life, people.
Right.
The War on Small Business right here.
But actually, it may be the most important thing. No joke. I mean, look. Going out to the bar, watching a game, having wings and rings and whatever else, you can't get that.
I tell you.
That's when people go, hey, wait a minute.
Right.
Hold on. When people hear like it's hard to get a computer chip, so computers are more expensive, they might go, I don't know. Actually, there was a survey done. They asked people about certain products and whether or not the cost had increased. And airplane tickets and electronics, people were unsure of and didn't know. But chicken wings and gas were way up, and they knew it. And bacon, too. So this is interesting. I think of all of the things that can be taken away because of government failures that impact small businesses, they really have to be careful, because if they start affecting
bacon supply, that would be tragic.
It is silly to think like, haha, bacon, but no, I mean, people wake up and have eggs and bacon. People go to McDonald's and get sausage, egg, and bacon. People eat these things, they enjoy them things. The reason it's a joke is because we know that people really love this stuff. If they can't find it, they start asking questions. People start getting mad, and that's when you got to get worried if you're the government.
Yeah, I mean, but it's about so much more than that. I mean, it really is about our economic freedom. I mean, I think people, when they think about business and you say, like, how many big businesses are out there? And I do this with people all the time. Like, I'll hear, like, oh, like, I think there's, like, probably, like, 1 million. And it's like, no, there's 5,000-ish publicly traded companies in the U.S., and there's, like, another 5,000 to 7,000, maybe up to 10,000. There's like between 10 and 15,000 big businesses in the U.S. There, before COVID, was 30.2 million small businesses that account for half the GDP and about half the employment. So when we talk about this, I think people feel like this is like a niche issue that doesn't really affect. This is half the economy. And if you have to understand sort of the thought process behind this, that if you are the government and you're trying to usurp power, which they have done in terms of how much they're spending, laws, purview, everything else, if you're trying to deal with people, you're trying to get reelected, you're trying to get campaign funds, you're trying to push legislation through, whatever it is, what's easier to do? Like get like 10,000 big businesses behind you or 30.2 million small businesses behind you? This is a nuisance. We heard the banks were too big to fail. They did awful things that ended up screwing up the economy for all of our lives, and they got a bailout. Yet they closed small business by mandate, and they got crumbs. Because not only are they too small to matter, but they are too hard to control. And that is the intention here. Like, you cannot walk away from this. You cannot go through this and think it's not intentional. And by the way, even if you don't, the outcome is still just as bad, but this is intentional.
Is the intent to just steal wealth from middle class and working class people?
It's to consolidate power by any means. What happens to those people, it doesn't matter, because they're not in the club. If you're not in the club, you don't matter. You're just like you're just pawns in the game. And so they have seen that we have allowed them to consolidate more and more power. I mean, you have small businesses, and there are a couple of examples of small business owners, Attila's Gym, Shelley Luther, and her Salon a la Mode that I talk about in the book, who said, no, you're not going to take my property. You're infringing on my property rights, and you haven't compensated me for it. But a lot of people said, well, okay.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.